Hi, my name is Carol Dysart, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Flexbox. So what is Flexbox and why should I use it? So Flexbox is a layout mode that aims to provide a more efficient way to lay out a web page, even when the size of the elements in the page are unknown or dynamic. For many users, Flexbox provides a welcome alternative over the block model in that it does not use floats. Essentially, you should use Flexbox because it lowers CSS stress. Flexbox's relatively simple properties make it an attractive choice in comparison to other CSS layout options. Even a simple sidebar layout can be challenging with floats, and other seemingly simple tasks like centering an item can be frustratingly complex. Flexbox makes these tasks much easier. A unique feature of Flexbox is that it's direction agnostic. This is not the case for other layout models. Block is vertically based and inline is horizontally based. So whereas floats only let us horizontally position our boxes, Flexbox gives us complete control over the alignment, direction, order, and size of our boxes. If you remember nothing else from today, remember this. Flexbox layout is composed of flex containers and flex items. Flex containers are just that. They're big containers that hold flex items. The job of the container is to group the items together and define how they are positioned. Every HTML child of a flex container is a flex item, and the main purpose of a flex item is to tell the container how many things it has to position. It's important to note that while Flexbox items can be manipulated individually, it's really the job of the container to determine their overall layout. Okay, so now you know a little bit about flex containers and flex items, so let's talk about properties on the parent, otherwise known as the flex container. So listed are 6 possible properties to place on the container. The first one we will talk about is the display property. This property is what allows us to actually enable Flexbox in our code. So in the example on the screen, we have some very basic HTML, which creates a container div that holds 3 divs or flex items within it. So Flexbox, however, has not been enabled yet in our CSS, so the output in blue simply displays each div stacked on top of the other. The first step in using Flexbox is to transform an HTML element into a flex container through the display property in your CSS page. So I enabled Flexbox. By giving the display property the value flex, you let the browser know that everything within this container should be displayed using Flexbox. So the output after turning our flex display on is like so. Great, so now we've enabled flex mode. But what next? We can further manipulate our flex items using other parent properties. So like I said before, Flexbox is direction agnostic. However, the default value is for our flex items to lay out in horizontal rows. This can be changed using the flex direction property. Flex direction establishes the main axis of your layout. If you set the value to column, like in this example, the layout will change to vertical columns. Setting the value to row sets the layout to horizontal rows, like this. So, although it's usually not necessary to explicitly do so unless you're switching back to a horizontal layout from a vertical one. This seems pretty simple, but the ability to transform rows into columns in a single line of CSS is actually very powerful. It's also incredibly useful when designing responsive layouts, as while most desktops display elements horizontally, most mobile layouts are displayed vertically in a single column. Justify content is another powerful container property. With justify content, you can reposition items by setting a property on the parent that defines the horizontal alignment of its flex items. So these are the possible values for justify content. Flex start packs items to the start line, flex end packs them toward the end line, and center centers them. By using justify content, you can also easily distribute items equally within a container. So looking at our example from before, if we set justify content to space around, our flex items will be evenly distributed in the line with equal space around them. If we change the value of justify content to space between, however, like so, extra space will only be added between the items, and our first and last items will be pushed to the edges. So it'll look like this. Okay. Align items is similar to justify content, but it instead determines the vertical alignment of the flex items. Think of it as justify content for the cross axis. Again, this is something that's simply not possible with floats. The values available for align items are similar to those for justify content with a couple exceptions. So most of these are pretty straightforward, but I will note that stretch literally stretches the items to fit the container, and baseline aligns items along a baseline. Flex wrap is the last parent property I will share with you. By default, flex items will all try to fit onto one line. You can change that and allow the items to wrap as needed with this property. Setting it to wrap will cause the items to wrap onto multiple lines from top to bottom. Setting flex wrap to wrap reverse will cause flex items to wrap onto multiple lines from bottom to top. Turning wrap on allows flex items to behave much like floated boxes, except Flexbox gives us more control over how extra items are aligned in the final row. You can use the justify content property to, for example, center the last line or set them to space between. Okay, so this wraps up our discussion of parent properties. Before I move on to discussing a couple child properties, I want to briefly mention grouping in regard to flex items. Flex containers only know how to position their children items. They can only position items one level deep. So the way you group your items, an extra div wrapped around some items can dramatically change your web layout. Complex web pages can be designed by nesting flex boxes. Flex items can be aligned within a flex container, and those flex items can in turn serve as flex containers for other items. So for now, let's look at a simple example. Looking at our previous example again, I modified our HTML, so two of our 3 flex items are wrapped in a div with the class users. Thus, our original container now has only 2 children instead of 3. If I set justify content to space between, the 2 children will be displayed on opposite ends of the page, like so. Now we can really go crazy by creating a nested flex container in our CSS. So I enabled Flexbox on the nested users container through the display property, added a little padding, and the result is as follows. Pretty cool. Okay, so we have been primarily talking about positioning flex items through properties set on the parent container, but it's also possible to manipulate flex items through properties on the flex item itself. Child properties are as follows: order, flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, and align self. The order property controls the order in which the items appear in the flex container. It doesn't affect the surrounding flex items, and the default value is 0. If you increase or decrease the value, it shifts the items to the right or left. Some of the more powerful child properties are flex grow and flex shrink, which embody the flexible nature of Flexbox itself. By using these properties, flex items can grow or shrink to fit their container. If all items have flex grow set to 1, the items will take up equal space within their container. However, if one of the items has flex grow set to 2, it will take up twice as much space as the others. Flex shrink works much like flex grow, except it defines the ability for a flex item to shrink. So that wraps up my presentation. I hope you found it useful and that it will inspire you to try out Flexbox for yourself. This is a list of resources I used in putting together this talk. Wes Boss, as many of you know already, has a great video series on Flexbox. And there's also a game called Flexbox Froggy, which you should check out. It's a pretty fun way to learn Flexbox. So, that's all. Thank you very much.